Okay. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Leadership Launchpad's Pick and Mix podcast. And as you can already see, we are joined by the amazing Haili Hughes. So let me just get the slides as normal up and running, and that will help us with this stuff. So here we go. Dun, dun, dun. There's your big face on the screen.
Yeah, big kind of filtered and edited face. This is like a flaming before and after. You're shaming me here.
Well, I always ask people to send me the picture because I never know whether I'm going to pick the right one off of Google or whatever. But
yeah, I've not done well here.
Well, we're going to get into Haili's roles in a minute, but you can see that she's, she's a busy lady. She's got lots of things going on, and so the first bit I guess is worth talking about is this idea of kind of. So, what are you doing at the moment?
Oh, Chris, what am I not doing? Yeah, I'm at a really, really interesting juncture. I'm going to use the word in my career. And, I've been, for those of you kind of are familiar with my work or follow me on social media or whatever, for the last sort of 4 years almost, I've been an academic at the University of Sunderland. I've still actually got 2 weeks left there, so I'm in a crossover phase from one university to the next at the moment. And I've also been Director of Education at Iris Connect. So I've been out of the classroom now for almost 4 years. When you say it like that, it's half a decade almost. It's gone in the blink of an eye. I'm not joking. And when I left school, I absolutely, my husband and I were putting money on it that I would be out for a year max because I cried my eyes out when I left. I didn't want to leave. But I felt like I had to do this because I was coming up for 40. I'd had this opportunity. And if I didn't try it, I would regret it. So, yeah, 4 years out, wanting to head back to school in some capacity or to a trust role, spoken to lots of amazing people who have been great mentors to me. Big shout out particularly to John Murphy, the amazing John Murphy, old ex-CEO of Oasis Academies. He's been an incredible mentor and spoken to lots of recruitment advisors, etc. And I don't know whether at the moment going back into a school full-time as a deputy head is the right move for me at the moment, because I've got too many other plates spinning with my academic role at Academic University of Applied Sciences in Amsterdam. And perhaps I need a trust role, but the ultimate goal, maybe 2 or 3 years from now, is to go back into a school and try and balance that with my professorship. And I think, and I'm one for sort of smashing glass ceilings and trailblazing. That's my whole kind of modus operandi. I think I would be the only professor in a university who is a serving teacher
Nice.
at that point. And I love that. I mean, how do you bridge the knowing doing gap? Well, I'm going to show you. So that's where I am. So ask me 6 months from now, will I know what my job is? No. And then that's scary, especially for a teacher who's gone through this really highly structured MPS, UPS, TLR system. But it's also exciting. So that's where I am. Nowhere,
Amazing.
Middle of nowhere.
Well, let's talk a little bit about then why the pull back to school?
One word, belonging. So yeah, I mean, I miss being part of a community. I'm so privileged that I work with an amazing team at Iris Connect. I'm just getting to know my colleagues at Academica who seem a great bunch. And look, my partner is Dr. Carl Hendrick, for goodness sake. I mean, like, honestly, who is like the most intelligent person I've ever met. But also funny and great to work with. So I am blessed, beyond blessed. But there is nothing quite like being in the trenches with colleagues in a school. And it's a hard job, but my goodness me, it's an incredible job. And I even miss being recognised in my local community, and going to the shops, going to the Tesco, and you're always buying like sanitary products or gin or something when the kids see you. I miss it. I miss that kind of feeling of sort of being famous without any of the perks, if you like.
That's great.
And I go into loads of schools now, work with hundreds a year. So privileged that people want me to come in and work with their amazing teams. But it's not the same. I'm flying in as somebody coming in doing a one-hit wonder or a few sessions, over the year, and I'm not going on that journey. And that's what I miss. It's that belonging. It's that flourishing. Andy Wolf from Church of England would want me to say that word, but it's true. It's the flourishing.
Yeah, amazing. You alluded to, and we're good friends, and I know how crazy, you're working with kids. But give us a sense of how would a typical week look?
Yeah. So at the moment, I'm employed by Iris Connect 4 days a week, and I'm employed by Academica 1 day a week, and I'm just finishing up at the University of Sunderland now. On top of that, I also work as a ITT quality advisor for the Department of Education, which has been an amazing journey. Difficult because I was involved in the market review, which was painful for lots of ICT providers, including me. I had to do Sunderland's. And I also facilitate the ECF and MPQs for 2 teaching school hubs, and I'm the English coach for Embrace Skit as well over in Blackburn. So I have lots and lots of roles, lots of hats, and that's not even my consultancy. So my boss at Iris Connect, Andy Newell, is incredibly flexible. He allows me to, as long as I get my work done at Iris Connect, I have the professional trust to be able to work on other things at the same time. And obviously those things are all good for Iris Connect's credibility and for Academica's credibility. So I don't work set days at any of my jobs. And I tend to do a couple of hours a day for Academica rather than a set day, because it doesn't work out. If you were to just say, I'm just doing Mondays, it doesn't work out like that. And the same with at Sunderland, over the last 4 years, if a student was to contact me on a Friday, it'd be incredibly unfair for me to say, actually, I'm not going to answer that till Monday.
Imagine that.
I mean, ridiculous. Yeah, especially in the neoliberal world of universities where people are paying thousands of pounds to study. So I tend to kind of be spinning 10,000 plates every single day. And I'm quite good at that. I enjoy it, which is what makes me think I don't want to go in as a deputy head again at the moment.
Sure, yeah.
But maybe one day. So it's a constant plate juggling. Sometimes it gets to me. I get to a Friday and I need a gin. But most of the time I manage to get it done, and I work on lots of trains.
Yeah, I love it. Well, that's really fascinating. I think that's probably the first link, whether we'll talk a bit more about this later, but the first link to leadership, in that you couldn't do what you do and be as engaged as you are without leaders like Andy and the guy. You're being led in a way that keeps you energized.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, for people that are new to the podcast, the format is standardized. We kind of go through various different kind of points during the podcast, of which Haili's done lots of prep. She's chosen a couple of kind of launch pads she wants to talk about, a couple of ignition points that have happened in her life, and then 3 kind of fast friends questions. And so we'll roll through them kind of one at a time. The first question that she chose was this one. If she could change anything about the way she was raised, what would it be? Wow. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I'm the eldest of 8 kids. A lot of kids. My mum had me when she was a teenager. It's sad when I look back on it, actually, because I think some people who have a young parent have the relationship with them when they're growing up where they're like friends and that they can confide in each other. But I feel like my own mum had quite a fraught background with her mum, and didn't speak to her up until the day she died, really. And my mum didn't really, I think she overcompensated and was very, very strict with me growing up because she was young. Because you can either go one or, you can be Regina George's mum from Mean Girls, can't you? And the cool mum, or the other thing. I had a really awful relationship with my mum growing up, which is just a shame because we get on really, really well now. And it wasn't really her fault. I was an incredibly difficult child. And I'm still quite a difficult woman. I'm very proud of it. So I wear a necklace, and you won't be able to see it from there, but it says obstreperous.
Oh, right.
That's me.
What's that mean? What's it mean?
Noisy, difficult to shut up, loud, opinionated. All of those things probably many, many great women are. So I guess the thing I'd change is that when I was growing up, because I'm the eldest of a large amount of children, we were all very, very pigeonholed, I would like to say. So I was the clever one. My younger sister was the pretty one. My other sister was the sporty one. And I think and I've grown up with incredibly low self-esteem about the way I look. And people wouldn't think that because I'm out there and I wear mad clothes. If any of you have ever seen me at a research ed or any other, I do not mould into a crowd. but I think that's probably a defense mechanism, in all honesty, because I've had massive issues with the way I look. And I think it's because I was brought up to believe that my superpower was my brain. And my sister, it's really interesting. My younger sister, there's only a couple of years between us, and we had an awful relationship growing up because it was incredible, like jealousy, and we were almost pitted against one another. Not purposefully, obviously, but that's what happened. We have a brilliant relationship now. You know, she's great. She's a TA in a further education college and does incredible work with some of our most vulnerable youngsters. I'm ever so proud of her. But we, you know, she said and confided to me since when we've grown up that actually, you know, she has always felt thick in comparison to me because I was the brains. So the thing I would change after that long ramble from me is probably the categorization and the pigeonholing. And I've learned to never, ever do that to children that I've taught. Never say, oh, you're such a body's brother. Oh, he was hard work. Or, you know, never do that because it can be so damaging. And only now in my mid-40s am I beginning to believe that actually I am worthy in terms of self-esteem. But it's wasted 40 odd years of my life.
It's so crazy, isn't it? And that makes me think, you know, we typically grow confidence in the things we're rewarded or recognized in, don't we?
Yeah.
And that is dangerous both as a parent and as a leader, you know, on our impact on the people below us. You know, that's well, the next thing that we're going to talk about is your first ignition point. And again, for new listeners, the idea behind this ignition point is that it will be an event in someone's life that's had some sort of transformational impact, hopefully in a positive way. So tell us a bit about kind of before the point and then afterwards.
Yeah, so I think probably my kind of first ignition point is all about when I had a very, very toxic leader, and I was an NQT, as was in an absolutely incredible school, very challenging demographic, lots of socio-economic disadvantaged students, but I grew up in that local area, and the school is the best school I've ever worked in my life. The staff were dedicated, the team was amazing, the kids were incredible, and you really, really made an impact on those kids' life. And unfortunately, I worked with very, very toxic leader at the time. And the worst thing about it is that I really respected this toxic leader because they were an incredible teacher, and they were incredibly inspirational, had an amazing background, and often used to use that as kind of fuel for their passion. And that made it worse because I really wanted them to like me, and they just didn't. And, you know, Dita Von Teese, the amazing burlesque artist, talks about kind of, you know, you can't be everybody's cup of tea, essentially. I think she uses the analogy of peaches. You know, not everybody likes the taste of peaches. And that's something I've grown up to come to terms with. But I do like to be liked. I have an incredibly fragile ego. So, you know, it really, really hurt me. And it got to the point that my school went into special measures, and the amazing head of English that we had disappeared literally overnight. She was close to retirement, and I just think she thought, forget this. It was incredibly stressful. And I ended up having to step up as head of English very, very early in my career. And it was awful, to be honest. We had like staff absence. We were having supplies coming in and literally lasting half an hour and walking out. So sometimes I was teaching 3-4 classes at the same time with the doors open. And as I said, I had an amazing team, but I wasn't a good leader, Chris. I was too young. I didn't have the mental models. Some people step up to middle leadership really, really early in the career. I absolutely wasn't ready for it. And especially not in the stress of a Category 4 school where you have Ofsted every 4 weeks. You've got the local authority in a supportive role, but it doesn't seem that way at the time. So I was a bad leader, and I was being led badly at the same time. And my ignition point was I was ready pretty much to walk away from teaching. And I had a decision to make, and it was either step down and go to another school and become a class teacher again and try and reignite my passion for why I'd done it, or leave teaching altogether. And I'd already been a journalist before I was a teacher, and I couldn't imagine changing careers again. So yeah, I moved to another school, and it was the absolute right thing to do. I moved to an amazing rural school called Saddleworth School. I was there for a decade, and yeah, had a grand old time being a classroom teacher and doing leadership roles within the school, and it enabled me to do 3 master's degrees, to study for my doctorate, being in the classroom, loving working with the kids, great staff. So that was my first ignition point.
Well, and that again makes me think a lot about the power of the environment, and that, it's not dissimilar, is it, to plants? And I suppose, it's not the plant, it's the environment the plant grows up in, it's the kind of nurturing, it's the soil conditions, blah, blah, blah. But I think a lot of people can feel like it's them, and what you've demonstrated there is that, a shift in environment, a shift in culture and in, social group or whatever reignited you, and it would have been a loss to everybody if you'd stayed where you were. So yeah.
I think kind of on that as well, it's interesting. I mean, there's Sam Gibbs and I, and obviously I know you had Sam on the podcast a while ago. Sam Gibbs and I are writing a book on teacher retention, and this is something that keeps coming back again and again, this idea about toxic leaders. And, there is some narrative about it on social media sites like X, etc. But I fear it's sometimes politicised a little bit because people are too quick to say, oh, yeah, it's multi-academy trusts. It isn't multi-academy trusts. No doubt there are some toxic trusts, but there's some absolutely incredible civic-minded trusts doing brilliant stuff. So when people try to tar all multi-academy trusts with the same brush, it's a ridiculous thing to do. I was bullied by a leader in a local authority Church of England school.
Yeah.
So nothing to do with trusts. So I think we need to depoliticise this idea about toxic leaders and it not be finger pointing between trads and progs left and right, because actually it's a really serious issue and it gets swept under the carpet too much.
Yes, I think I completely agree. And, I think, always look deeper, always ask more questions. So the next part that we're going to move into is our first kind of launch pad. So this is selected by Haili, and I'll kind of briefly, describe why I made it, what was the stimulus, and then we'll ask why it resonates with you. And so this is about kind of critically engaging with research. And when I kind of wrote it, this is what stuck in my mind really, kind of this idea that we have to have a strong evidence base before we make any kind of decisions. But for lots of us, myself included, and that might surprise, I'm sure Haili will resonate as well, that despite us both having doctorates, I used to and still find it hard to engage in a lot of research. And so confidence is a big thing. And without a kind of framework, I'm not sure it's as easy. And I tripped over this framework by Professor Steve Higgins, who's up at kind of University of Durham, and thought, wow, this is an interesting way for me to just hang my initial thinking. And since then, I've used it in schools to kind of help people, I guess, select the right research. But he talks about this idea of, is the research you're looking at accurate? So does it have internal validity in that, is it testing what it's supposed to test? And does it have external validity in that, is it strong enough to potentially be generalized beyond your case? Then he talks about kind of actionable, we want to provide, research that can be implemented practically and realistically, because people will typically lose interest or, kind of just not enjoy the credibility of it if they don't think it's actionable. He talks about it being acceptable, so again, this credibility thing. He talks about applicable, which is important, does what you're looking at or does what you're giving out to your staff fit with your context? Because people will instantly dismiss it if it's, I don't know, some 18th century study from South America and you work in an inner city Bristol school. He talks about how appropriate it is, and so does it actually represent a good solution to a real problem that you've got in your school? And then for me, this is one of the biggest ones, and I think this is where organizations like the EEF and the organization you're working with, Haili, do a great job of almost making research more palatable. How easy is it for the users to access it and to understand it? Because I remember when I first started, some research papers are quite kind of impenetrable. Even just the format of them off-putting to someone with, low self-efficacy for academics like myself. So I was really taken by that. But why did it resonate with you, Haili?
I think probably for all the reasons that you've said. And then it's something I've been musing over for a long time, to be honest. I think there's a certain core group of people who would claim that teaching has only been an evidence-based profession for the last 10 years. They're completely wrong. I remember doing my PGC sort of 20 years ago when we were using evidence from Vygotsky, Piaget, Brunner, etc. then. I think what they mean is probably cognitive science evidence and research, and teachers kind of being encouraged to engage in that more, because I think we all engage in it as part of our PGCEs. We have no choice. We have to write essays that are based on it. But like many people, sort of, 20 years ago when I qualified, I didn't use research for probably the first 10 years at least of my career, because I was too busy doing the actual job in the classroom. I didn't have access to anything. It was behind paywalls. And to be honest, a lot of the ways that I was teaching that I've probably thought were based on intuition were probably based on evidence anyway that I'd had from a PGCE. I am willing to die on the hill that the introduction of cognitive science into kind of most teachers' sort of worlds is a good thing. It was a complete light bulb moment for me. And when I found out, I remember seeing Willingham's memory model and going, oh, okay, yes. That's why my year nines don't remember a thing that I did with them the week before. That's why my bottom set year 10s don't seem to be capable of taking the skills and the knowledge that I've taught them and doing something with it, because there's working memory processing issues there, right? So I'm willing to die on that hill. What has been worrying me, though, over the last couple of years is kind of the introduction and the blanket generic introduction of a lot of very complex ideas in research that's been done in labs, for instance, into classrooms. And I think the early career framework is a bit like this. It's very generic. It is more secondary centric than primary. So, for example, some of the statements in there are really difficult to make sense of if you're an EYFS teacher, for example. But something that's been worrying me particularly is kind of the transmission of this research to the average classroom teacher. So we tend to have like teaching and learning leads, PD leads in schools. They might read a piece of research and then they might be the gatekeeper of that to teachers and tell them the things that they think are relevant. That's absolutely right, because that's their job, and teachers don't have time, as we've discussed, to sit and read all these papers. What worries me, though, and this is something that Jenny Webb kind of articulated at the Inner Drive Teaching and Learning Summit at Eton a couple of weekends ago, is that a lot of teaching and learning leads in school might not read the original paper. What they might read is a one-pager that somebody amazing like Jamie Clark or somebody has made. The one-pagers are brilliant. I love him. I've got my own mentoring one that Jamie did for me. Or they might read an edu book, which is somebody's interpretation of that research. Or they might, even worse, they might read a blog that is somebody's interpretation of some interpretation of some interpretation of that research. And then before we know it, what we get is lethal mutations that are kind of going on in schools. And I have to say, and Carl Hendrick and I are doing a webinar on retrieval tomorrow, I have to say that retrieval is one of these things. And I've, as I say, I'm in hundreds of schools. I've noticed a lot recently that I'm watching retrieval activities which are mandatory at the start of lessons. 6 questions, 5 questions, one from last week, one from last term, one from yesterday. You know the format. It's pretty much what all schools are doing. But what I'm seeing is that there's a complete misunderstanding of the research on retrieval. So, for example, the questions that they're asking have no thematic or knowledge link to what's about to be taught. And the whole point is that we're retrieving knowledge from long-term memory, from our schemas, that links to the new knowledge because it makes it more sticky and is more likely to be embedded in long-term memory. That's not happening. It's random questions taken from anywhere. And then I'm not seeing anybody, I've not seen a single lesson in 3 years where kids have got a massive amount of the retrieval questions wrong. They've forgotten them. And then they're adapting their lesson. They're carrying on the lesson. So I have to ask, like, I do worry that retrieval is going to be one of those things that we look back at in 10 years and go, what on earth we were doing? If we're not careful, retrieval is going to become the new De Bono's thinking hats.
Yeah.
So we need to really, really think I think critically and carefully about the research that we're putting into our lessons and make sure we're reading the proper source material.
Yeah. That's fascinating. And there's something in there around, as well as going back to the source, having multiple sources.
Yes.
And that it isn't, if you're a teacher, your teaching and learning lead is not the only voice that you should be listening to.
No.
I mean, we're lucky, aren't we? And, we've got potentially a bit more awareness and maybe some more capacity of what else is happening. But you just alluded to there are incredible free events that people can attend to widen their perspective. And again, we have to be mindful that, just because you go to an event, that might not be the gospel on it.
No.
But it's another point of view that if you can kind of condense the 3 or 4 things together, you'll have a better understanding. So
yeah, I think there's just misunderstandings, isn't there, Chris? And it's easy to understand why it gets misunderstood, because the teachers are incredibly busy. Very often they'll get these directives from on high. Sometimes the why might not be discussed. Sometimes they don't have the opportunity to adapt things for subject context or phase context.
Exactly.
And direct instruction is another thing. I'm a massive proponent of explicit instruction, but it doesn't mean a teacher talking at the class for an hour. If you watch Engelman's original videos of this from like the 60s, it's very high participation. There's loads of checking for understanding. So when I'm going into classrooms that are completely silent for the whole hour, I'm asking myself, is this a complete misunderstanding of direct instruction? And English classrooms absolutely should not be an hour silent with kids not talking, because English, the very nature of it is discursive, and oracy is obviously a big focus at the moment as well.
Excellent. Brilliant. Well, so the next thing we're going to move on to is obviously the second set of these things. And so the second kind of fast friends question that Haili picked was this. So tell us about that. What do you value most in a friendship?
I think I value a friend who always has my name in their mouth, if that makes sense. So I'm talking kind of professional friendships as well with this. So I like to think that as a female leader in the education sphere who has a certain sphere of influence, not a huge one. I don't think I'm, Tom Cruise or anything, but I have a few followers on X, and people read my books and things like that. I feel like I have a voice. I think it's really important for me to elevate other female leaders and to put the ladder down, because there has been some amazing female leaders who have done that for me. Early on in my career in this whole world of kind of the edu sphere, it was people like Sam Twistleton and Rachel Lofthouse who gave me incredible opportunities. Dr. Debbie Kidd, another one. And I now like to do the same for other people. And that's what I value, this idea actually that, we amplify others and that we're not kind of selfishly keeping hold of things and not using other people's expertise, because I think, I like to think we live in a meritocratic society, but we don't. And there are millions of teachers out there doing incredible things in classrooms who've got stuff to say that we should all listen to, and they don't get the opportunity. And that's what I value.
Yeah, I need to write that down. Well, that idea of the great leaders amplify others. I mean, that is amplify others. That's massive, isn't it?
And what I don't mean as well is I mean people who live it, not laminate it. So there are lots of people who might write blogs about empowering others or, talk the good talk, but actually they're not really doing it, because behind closed doors, people are actually talking about these people and how nasty they've been to others and done this. And, I live my values. I don't laminate it, because I've worked for leaders who laminate it, don't live it. And I think that's really important to do that. I mean, one leader that comes to mind in particular that's brilliant, this is Sufyan Sadiq from Chiltern. Always got his hand out to others, helping them succeed, thinking, I know this person's got this, to offer. And he's absolutely brilliant at that.
Yeah, brilliant. Amazing. Okay, well, let's keep moving on. We're going to go on to your second kind of ignition point, which when I read it, couldn't wait to hear more about this one. So tell us a bit about before the point and then what happened after.
So this was Jenny Webb, wasn't it?
Love
Yeah.
it.
So yeah, I mean, Jenny's going to absolutely cringe when she hears this. But I was getting quite bored working in a school. As I say, I was a classroom teacher, and I was feeling like I would probably needed to be forced to apply for a leadership position. I didn't know whether I particularly wanted it, but you get to. I remember a long time ago, an amazing assistant head teacher that I worked with called Hugh Chambers, who I'm still friends with. He's long retired now. I remember one point him saying to me, it's okay to step down from leadership, Haili, but actually you're going to get to a point in your career where you're looking at others who are leaders around you and you're going to start getting frustrated because you know that you can either do a better job or do the job. And that kind of happened. So I'm looking at like sort of the leaders I was working with at the school and sort of the middle leaders and senior leaders. I'm thinking, right, well, actually, I wouldn't have done that and I'd have done this because of this, this and this, and starting to get frustrated. And I attended I think it might have been a Women Ed event, actually, up in Leeds, and met Jenny Webb. And I was already familiar with her work from her sort of funky pedagogy website and from her books, How to Teach English Literature, etc. And I was a bit starstruck when I met her. And I don't know whether you've met Jenny before, but yeah, she's a force of nature, completely and utterly. And I remember meeting her and being a bit starstruck, and she sat next to me on the table, and I was like, goodness me, I'm sat next to this like icon. And she's just been so kind, and she's such a visible northern woman leader as well. And there's not many women on that kind of national stage who sound like me. And that's why I love Bridget Phillipson, right? Because, she's a normal working class person like Jenny and I, who's come from, humble backgrounds and has worked really, really hard to get where she is. And I still have a very northern kind of working class chip on my shoulder, and I don't think I'll ever get rid of it because there aren't many people that sound like me, who are leaders. So it was amazing to meet Jenny. And then she's just been an incredible advocate. And I spoke before about, friends always having your name in their mouth. Jenny helped me get my first publishing deal at John Catt because she gave me email addresses for Alex Sharratt, who ran it at that time. She helped me start to get out as a consultant, has always given me sort of advice on what she would do, because it's an alien world, this when you go into it. And she's just been an incredible support and always, introducing me to the right people. And she made me understand that actually northern working class women who are mothers, right, and who are balancing loads of stuff can also do great things. So Jenny's just amazing.
That is so cool. And it reminds me of that, I don't know if this is the exact phrase, but if you can see it, you can be it.
Yeah.
Sort of thing.
Windows, mirrors and sliding doors, right? That's what it's all about.
I'm not sure there's any proper West Country leaders either,
No, you're absolutely blazing a trail, Chris Baker. Yeah, you are. Yeah.
Farmer leadership. Hilarious.
Love it.
Well, of course, what will be awkward, and I don't know how we'll avoid this, but if we get Jenny on the podcast, if she doesn't say that meeting you was an ignition point, then that could be
friendship over. Yeah, we're doing an edit.
I love it. Well, this is really fascinating, this next one. So Haili's chosen her second launchpad, and as with the first one, I'll briefly describe where it came to for me, and then we'll see where it resonates with her. And so for me, this came about actually from a Reach Foundation session with John Hutchinson. Mm-hmm. And this idea of public narratives, that they're stories that help people connect with their emotions, understand shared values, and then kind of develop sense of purpose, things like that. And the way that it was presented to us by John was this idea that as leaders, a lot of times we got to sell things, we got to sell visions, we got to sell ideas. We're trying to bring people on board with a new direction or kind of a compelling vision for the future. And a lot of times we lean on just natural kind of, abilities or kind of, attributes. And that means that potentially we're better or worse at it at different times. And whenever we find ourselves, I think personally, doing things, in a variable amount of effectiveness, we should probably systematize it and try and find some way of frameworking it. And so he presented this idea that it came from a guy called Marshall Gans, is this idea of public narrative. And when you think about these things, it's probably easier to think about it as a kind of chronological way of moving through a vision, a statement or something. And he suggests that when we do these things, we should start with the story of us. And so when we talk about things, we talk about our own experiences, values, and motivations, because those are the foundations. And they allow the audience to make a personal connection with us and instantly make it relatable and almost compelling. He then says that once you've kind of talked a bit about yourself, you then have to then shift to the story of kind of us. So this is where you link it then to the audience. So you lean really heavily in on kind of shared experiences or the goals. And that really helps people, again, connect what your story is and what their story is. And then just strengthens that, oh my God, we're all on the same page. Let's do this. But the fascinating bit is that that's not the end of it. You've got to kind of put a bit of a point on the end. And he talks about this idea of then switching to the story of now and saying that, okay, so this is who I am, this is who we are, but this is where we are. And actually, this is the problem that we're all going to now attack. And it almost like a call to action, some sort of motivational, like, trumpet sound, which creates motivation, but also a sense of urgency. And so when I looked at this, I was fascinated. And John actually put us way out of our comfort zone during that session. And I appreciated that because we had to come up with our own public narrative there and then and present them in front of groups of people we didn't know. And at the time, I felt really awkward about it. And since then, I've reflected on how clever that is, that he got us practicing, which is something I've become increasingly passionate about in leadership development, but also equally sad that it's not a massive part of lots of leadership development courses. Anyway, why did it resonate with you?
He's dead clever, that John Hutchinson, isn't he? He's great. And I think what Reach are doing is, Ed Vanker and his team is absolutely incredible, especially for kids like me who came from poverty. So yeah, this resonates with me because actually my whole kind of work at the moment is very much based around the narrative of teaching and the teaching profession and the public narrative, especially of this. So last year I passed my doctorate last February. So it's already been a year since my Viva, which is incredible. And my thesis was actually on the portrayal of teachers in the media during the COVID-19 pandemic and what effect that had on teachers' professional identities. And I think it's sad that in the last 5 or 6 years, I think we've kind of lost sight of what it means to be a teacher and actually what schools actually even do, because it's become so kind of muddied with sort of us being social workers, helpers with parents' debts, psychologists, CAMS workers, that actually what schools actually do, I don't think is there's basically a massive disjointed idea. I think because everybody went to school, they think they understand what schools do, but it's changed so much even since COVID that there's a mismatch there. And I'm on the teaching commission, which is led by the amazing Mary Booster, who is just like my idol, looking at kind of retention of teachers in England at the moment. And we've been listening to some really interesting stuff. But for me, I think what it comes down to is actually this public narrative about teachers. And if we look at, the DFE can give pay rises, it can give golden hellos, it can look at flexibility, which I think is massively important. But what it comes down to is actually teachers being able to have pride in the profession and being proud to be a teacher because because there's a national narrative about how important teachers are. And I think that's been eroded and it's not helped by national newspapers. I won't name them, but we all know who we're talking about, publishing kind of stories during the pandemic insinuating that teachers are lazy and that they were sat at home on furlough, And I don't know about you, Chris, but I've never worked harder than during the pandemic. I was in school 2-3 days a week. teaching kids in bubbles, because if you were in a school that has a large disadvantaged intake, most of your school was in. Anyway, it wasn't closed like the public narrative. The rest of the time teaching asynchronous lessons, live lessons, and having kids contacting me on Teams at midnight, and feeling compelled to answer those because of possible safeguarding issues. And that's just not even teaching my own kids and, or everything else we had to do. So it was, I think, and the papers were kind of insinuating that teachers were on furlough or, were sort of sat watching Netflix and having barbecues. And, it's bonkers, complete bonkers. And that had a massive, massive impact on teachers' self-determination. If you think back to Desi and Ryan, if you don't think that you are competent at your job, it's going to be very hard to feel motivated. And it eroded teachers' sense of belonging and sense of who they are as professionals. We're all just little human beings on this planet, and we all just want to belong to something, and we're just trying to find our people. And schools have always been a big driver for that, because we belong and we're with our people and we have a sense of purpose. But I think that's just been eroded massively. So I feel like any moves we're making towards trying to retain teachers has to centre on changing the public perception of the narrative of what it means to be a teacher. And if we look at research from around the world of the countries that have the best attrition of teachers, teaching is a really highly respected job in that country. Not like here, where people think you're in at 8, home at 3. And we're lazy.
And that's really, it's really interesting. We think about kind of public narrative and the stories that we tell. And I think that's a role that leaders need to take seriously as well, about the stories they're telling their staff, or how they're making their staff feel, how valued and things like that. And we talked offline about a podcast you're doing at the moment with head teacher. Tell us a bit about that.
Yes, it's called Sitting in the Chair. I'll plug it, available on Spotify. And we've done 4 episodes so far. We've got the next one will drop this afternoon, which is the 26th, because I don't know when this will come out. So it might be episode 6, 7 by this time, who knows. But the premise behind it is that it's essentially interviewing a head from all 58 cities in the UK about the realities of their headship now, the joys, the trials, the tribulations, warts and all, and what are the particular challenges that they're facing in their context as well, because being a head in Sunderland might not be the same as inner city London. They're both equally difficult with different challenges. And I did this podcast for 2 reasons. One is because I'm considering headship myself, and I'm doing an MPQH, which doesn't teach you how to be a head in any way. You can't do it without sitting in the chair, hence the name of the podcast. I wanted to find out the most I possibly could about whether I want to be a head or not, and this seemed like a really good idea. And the second reason is actually to bring this to policymakers' attention at the Department for Education, because I don't think anybody has any real idea of the crisis that we're walking into with the retention of heads specifically, because there's lots of talk about teacher retention, 1 in 3, 40,000 left last year, all of that. I'd love to see some data on the head teachers that have left or want to leave, because almost every head that I speak to is looking for a way out.
Yeah. Well, and it talks to a little bit to that phrase I wrote down, the idea that you are looking to amplify others and to amplify the voices of those head teachers, which is great. Well, the last bit of today is this final fast friend question. And so this was the question that you chose, which is fascinating. So what personal quality do you think you need to develop the most?
Oh, patience. Ask my husband. Yeah, I am the type of person who wants something done yesterday. I'm frenetic in everything I do. And I think that probably comes from being a teacher as well, because obviously what we do makes the biggest difference in the classroom. And sometimes because of that, we tend to sort of hold on for dear life to silver bullets that we think might work. And we want to make an impact yesterday, not today. And I've kind of carried on with that, really. And what it means that I probably have the potential or the capacity to work for like 22 of the 24 hours in the day. And I have to make a real conscious effort to actually get to 6 o'clock or whatever and turn off my laptop. At the moment, I'm busy marking MPQs for Ambition Institute. So anybody who's done one or is marking this will resonate with what I'm about to say. If I see the words graphic organizer again, I think I'm going to cry. But I'm currently marking those, so I'm sat into the night, using comparative judgment to mark those. But usually those moments are few and far between. But I absolutely have to push myself to switch off, because otherwise I've got 20 tabs open in my brain all the time, and it's not good for your well-being.
It's not. No. And yeah, I mean, I can definitely resonate with that, and this idea that, you can fool yourself, can't you, that more is better. And, for me and you, who potentially are going through life with a pretty big chip on our shoulder, trying to find things that, A, make ourselves proud, but also, I think somebody recently said, Chris, you're okay, and it's like, oh, I don't feel that, I'm still looking for the thing to make myself.
I don't think we'll ever feel it, Chris. That's the conclusion that I've come to, because I always feel like I'm living in a liminal space. Yeah. Like, I don't belong in academia. I don't belong back in the working class where I grew up. Yeah. I'm somewhere in between, and I'm constantly, thinking the rug's going to be pulled from underneath me, and that's good in a way, because you don't rest on your laurels. You're not complacent, but it's exhausting.
It is exhausting, yeah. I think we'll have to arrange for all of us to end up in the same nursing home, and then we can
we can all rant away over our porridge, and moan about the state of the world. Yeah.
Amazing. Well, again, super sad that for me that we've come to the end of this. So the first thing is to say thanks, and we've talked about a few of the things that you've got going on, and people can connect you on all the kind of socials. Is there anything else you want to talk about that, people can connect with? I know you said yesterday there's going to be some online webinars and stuff.
Yeah. So my work at Academica, University of Applied Sciences, over in Amsterdam, we're launching a course called How Teaching and Learning Happens, which is absolutely incredible. And it's led by Dr. Carl Hendrick, Dr. Jim Heal, who works over in America for Deans for Impact most recently for a long time. Both incredible people, but it features people like Paul Kirshner, for goodness sake. So we're launching this course, and the webinars are part of that. So we've got one every Thursday for the next 4 weeks. The first one's retrieval, but we'll also be looking at scaffolding, checking funding, and also kind of talking about lethal mutations as well as part of that. So you can join Carl and I. If you look on any of those socials that you've got there is a link.
We'll get the links in the chat, and then of course I am unashamedly a huge fan of Iris.
Yeah.
Part of my change model for everything is you can't change what you don't acknowledge.
Yes.
And you can't acknowledge what you're not aware of. And I don't know how you can function without some sort of video element of professional development. And so
yeah, absolutely. And in terms of Iris, it's very exciting. We've got our instructional coaching conference this week with a keynote by the brilliant Sam Gibbs, who I know is a mutual friend of both of ours. And we're launching our new instructional coaching model, which has been designed by Sarah Cottinghat. Right. It's called the Learn model, and it's quite different from other models that are out there. It's centered around this idea of decision making. So not just that Sarah probably spoke to you about this, but not just drilling techniques. It's about why those techniques at that time. So what you're doing and why at that time. So very much drilling down into mental models, as opposed to kind of the technicized drilling of techniques.
Great. Well, again, for the listeners, if you've enjoyed, this, you can get this on the normal kind of podcast. If you're interested in the book where all the launchpads come from, you can do this QR code. And again, like Haili, happy to connect with anybody on social media. So thanks for listening. And I'll see you at the next one.